Psychology is about your life. It's about who you are. It's about how you form relationships. It's about how you see, think, feel.
What is the basis for ourselves? How do we perceive the world? How do we understand words, concepts, other people?
That kind of subjective part of life is something that much of the rest of college education doesn't provide us. At least it doesn't give us a sense of what it's like to be the many people who we experience in our everyday lives. Psychology offers that.
What could be more interesting than finding out about ourselves? Now, I know that sounds a little egocentric, but the truth is, we care mainly about ourselves and other human beings. Psychology is the study of everything human beings do, from the level of the neuron to the level of the neighborhood to the level of the nation. Understanding human behavior from the brain through the society. What could possibly be more interesting than that?
I first became exposed to psychology in high school. I took a health course that had a segment on psychology, and that grabbed my attention. I found that very interesting, more interesting than most things I was studying in high school, and it perked my interest enough that when I went to college, I went in pretty much with the idea that I would major in psychology.
You know, I kind of stumbled into a career in psychology. I actually went to sign up for a course in creative writing, but the course was closed. So I'd come a long way to sign up, and I asked the woman, what's open? She said, psychology. And I thought, well, that's about people. That's a lot like learning to be a writer, because that's what I wanted to be, not a psychologist. Anyway, I took that psychology course, and from then it was a very easy call, because I suddenly found something that was endlessly fascinating to me, the study of human behavior. I never looked back.
As a high school student, I was, well, I can admit it freely now, I was a geek. Loved physics, did science fairs. Then I had an epiphany of sorts that when I got to college, after I was there for several years, physics just wasn't doing it for me anymore. I started to notice that the most important thing in my life was people. And I thought, what could be better than turning all that physics interest, the ability to reason about things and think about them and investigate them, on the most interesting thing in the world, people.
What I've been studying for the last 10 or 15 years is how and how well people can look into the future and predict what will make them happy, how long that happiness will last. Turns out people aren't always very good at this, and I stumbled into this research area because I wasn't very good at it myself. I had a year in my life where a lot of things went wrong. My son was being a problem, and my best friend and I had a falling out, and I had a parent die. A lot of bad things happened to me, and I found that I was actually okay. It wasn't the best year of my life, but it wasn't horrible. So what I found was that I wasn't a particularly good predictor of my own emotions, and I wondered why. When I went to the psychological literature, I didn't see an answer. You know, when a scientist finds an interesting problem to which there is no answer, that's like discovering the promised land. So suddenly I set forth on a research career to answer that very question.
I became actively involved in some experimental research that started to touch on memory, and was introduced to a psychologist who was working at Duke University. One of the things he was studying was memory disorders in patients with brain damage. I was involved in testing these patients, and I was immediately struck by, on the one hand, how bad their memories were. So we would do a test with them, talk with them, give them some materials to remember. Then I would walk out of the room, come back in a minute later, and the person who seemed so entirely normal to me could not remember that we had just spent the past hour talking and testing and whatnot. And really seeing that with my own eyes, seeing those patients, is what got me interested in the study of memory.
Early in my college career, I read a story about the young Dostoevsky. He had become interested in the fact that you can't stop thinking about a white bear. And he noticed that if you try to stop thinking about it, it comes back every minute. And I realized this is a rule of life, that when we try not to think about something, we somehow make it more important. It seems to come back more often than it should. In social psychology, my specialty, is about how we influence each other, how we fall in love, how we fall in hate, what causes war, what causes conflict, what are the things that you can do to make people around you happy, how can you make your life longer by being a different person. One of the things I learned from my students is, I think, something some college professors may not always learn, which is to watch them very carefully and see what makes them glow. I tend to be very sensitive to audiences. Usually I can tell if they're happy or not happy. And noticing when my class is glowing, when they're loving what we're talking about, when they're really learning from it, that's the thing that grabs me as a professor.
I think what I enjoy the most about teaching psychology to college students is seeing how their views of the mind and behavior and the field of psychology as a whole change from the point that they enter a class to the time that they exit. So they will often come in again with strong intuitions about whatever aspect of psychology it is that we're taking. But one of the things students learn as they go deeper into a course is that many of these intuitions and casual observations are wrong or misleading.
You know, I think the single most important thing that psychology teaches students is to be skeptical of their own intuitions. One of the things in every chapter of a psychology book that we learn is that the world isn't necessarily the way it appears. And that lesson of skepticism is, I think, the single most important thing that psychology has to teach us.
I think what struck me in doing this textbook and really taking a step back and looking broadly at the field was how many points of interconnection there are between different areas.
One of the joys of writing our textbook, and one of the joys of teaching introductory psychology, is to try to help students see that psychology is not just a list of unrelated topics. There's actually a big story, a single story that unfolds over many, many chapters.
You can see bits and pieces of work on memory showing up in social psychology. You can see how work on development, child development, is influencing our understanding of aging.
There's something nice about having a field that's so broad that allows you to think about many different life situations, put them into different lights and think about what you ought to do, what you should not do, kind of where to go with your life.
What this course is going to allow you to do is to develop a new way of thinking about yourself and about other people. And I think some of the insights synthesized in the textbook are going to help you see yourself in a way that you wouldn't otherwise.
There's a period of time when, instead of learning things, learning specific facts, learning a list of stuff you need for the test, there's something about college that's a whole shaping experience, that it turns you into the kind of person you're going to be later on. It's something about learning to be a person. So I think the college experience is particularly formative because of learning how to be a person. I think learning about psychology is a central idea that really helps us along that road.
After you graduate from college, I'm willing to bet that you forget most of the math and all of the chemistry, unless you happen to be a mathematician or a chemist. But you will remember the things you learned in psychology as long as you live, because they are the lessons that you need to know to have a happy, healthy life.
It'll teach you ways to think about things that happen to you that make them not so rough on you, that ease out those bumps. Every chapter in a psychology book has that kind of possibility of creating good things in your life.